So what I want to do is I want to think about Jesus. I want us to look at Jesus. We're only going to spend a few more minutes, and then I want us to get up, and we're going to practice this a little bit, okay? So I want to look at Jesus, and he best demonstrated, this is always the best way to go about things, is to look at Jesus. He best demonstrated this idea of communication and how to communicate with people who thought very differently than he did. I want to just look at 3 quick examples, okay? So, for example, Jesus at the pool of Bethesda, chapter 5 in John, okay? Jesus goes, and he's at this pool where disabled people would go, and they would go into the pool and they could get well. And Jesus sees an invalid there, and he's been there for 38 years, chapter 5 of John. 38 years hanging around this pool. And Jesus approaches the man and says, "Do you want to get well?" Now, we could spend the whole evening talking just about the question, do you want to get well? Do you want to get well? Depending on how he asked the question. But he asked the question. We're not going to spend the time on the context necessarily, but what we do, or pardon me, the context, the content of the question, but what I do want us to think about is the fact that he approached the person and asked a question, number one. He asked a question. What does asking a question do? It draws someone out. Okay, think about that, log that. Okay, he asked a question and drew the man's heart out. The man said, "I can't get inside the water. I've been lying here 38 years and I just can't get in." So Jesus was able, by asking the question, to draw him out. What is it you want? What is it you're looking for? What is it you need? Number one. Number two, second example. John chapter 4. And we see Jesus now with the woman at the well. Jesus approaches the woman at the well. Notice, second time he approaches the person. He goes to where they are. He says to the woman at the well this, "Can I have some water?" What do you notice there? He makes a request of the woman. He asks a favor. Now, what does that show us? It shows Jesus coming in low, right? Putting himself in a vulnerable position and humble. Right? And then actually the text goes on that she's the one asking the questions and he's responding. So there's this question and answer going back and forth, we see. And we see Jesus coming in low, humility. Okay, so the first one is what again? What's one of the things that we're noticing from the first text? Remember?
Drawing people out.
Okay, drawing them out by how? Questions. Okay, questions, number one. The second is come in low, humble. Okay? Third example, third and final example. Jesus also goes out, and he goes out. Notice that's the third thing. Third time we see Jesus is the one going out. He goes out. And he's among the multitudes, okay? And this is all through the Gospels. Jesus is among the multitudes. And he speaks truth, okay? That's the third thing. He speaks truth. When he speaks truth, what happens? Some people say, awesome, and they choose to follow him. Other people say, no way, rubbish, and they do not. Now you notice Jesus doesn't run up to the people and say, wait, I think there's a misunderstanding. Let me try and explain this a little further. He never tries to convince them. He lays out the truth, and then he lets the people choose. Notice that. He lays out the truth. Now, of course, it's Jesus. His truth was always truly true. He is truth. He doesn't just dispense truth. He is truth. We do not have the same measure of truth, do we? Would we all agree with that? Maybe you would go, wait a minute, I disagree. Let me hear from you. Yeah.
I agree.
Do you?
Yeah.
You get that? You hold the truth humbly, because there will come a time when you'll say, oh my gosh, I thought that this is what that scripture meant. And 5 years later, you're going to go, God is so much bigger than I realized. Now I understand it means this more fully. Do you understand? If theology does evolve. I mean, it's our theology, it's our doctrine. We hold it in some ways tightly, in other ways like this, because we submit to the Spirit of God, we submit to the Word, and we submit to people who've studied a heck of a lot longer than we have, and we change, right? And as we go through life, we go, wow, I thought I knew you. That's actually my prayer. I say, God, I know you so well. I've walked with him for so long. But when I'm 50, I want to go, oh, I thought I knew you then. And then when I'm 70, I want to say, oh, I thought I knew you then. Do you see how that just keeps growing? So that does change. He holds complete truth. You do not. We do the best we can. We do the best we can. but we hold it humbly. So, as Jesus goes out, back to the text, as Jesus goes out to the multitudes, some of the people say no, some of the people say yes, I want to follow you. And then what we also notice in that is a good example actually of that too is Judas. Judas at the Last Supper, he looks at Judas and says, do what you have to do. And he lets him go his way, right? He lets the people choose. It's a very important thing. He puts out truth and he lets the people choose. Very important. That's 3 and 4. Holds out truth and lets the people choose. The only thing that was different, as you look at Jesus speaking to the multitudes, the only difference is when he's speaking to the religious people. For example, the Pharisees. When he's speaking to the Pharisees, now the Pharisees were the ones who, okay, this was interesting. This is interesting. The Pharisees were the ones who really studied the scriptures. They're the ones who memorized and lived by the scriptures. This is what I'm meaning, going back to truth, what I was talking about a minute ago. They lived by the scriptures. They had a very high value of the scriptures. And yet, Jesus spoke very harshly with them. They were the ones who sent their kids to Awana. They were the ones who went to all the Bible studies, very high value. We would sort of be, or you know, they would be that version, that old version of evangelicals. They would kind of be us then. Does that make sense? Or we would be them now. And so they had a very high value of scripture. And so as they, the way Jesus handled them was he was actually quite curt with them, quite harsh with them. And we see this a lot. And I think there were maybe 2 good reasons for that. One is because they were holding something that was so precious, and what should have been used to bring life and liberty and love to the people, he used to oppress the people, and they thought it was called truth. And the other reason he was probably so harsh and hard on them is because they, of all people, should have gotten it. Of all people, you guys should get it. They were so close. And yet they were so far. And so even those people, he said, you choose. And let them choose and go their way. All right? So recap from those 3 examples, from the 3 examples of Scripture, the recap on that we can glean to use for our purposes when we're engaging with people who think differently than we do is 1, ask questions. 2, come in low, humble, vulnerable. 3 is to speak the truth, holding it gently, not speak the truth, but speak the truth. And number 4, you let people choose. Make sense?